Okay, so we're at Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. We read this brayso, so we're going to read it again because we're going to be busy analyzing it. Uh, the Tanya. So it's the second paragraph, right at the beginning of 13a1. Hichne shibolim. So if you brought grain, full stalks, well, and it's not necessarily stalks, but it might be stalks or it might just be uh full grains that haven't been processed at all into the house. Lazos mehem eat. So in general, we said, so in order for something to be chayiv and truma and maaser, you have to have finished processing it. So normally, well, we'll see later some other examples, but normally it gets put in a pile. But depending on what type of crop it is, it might be a little different. And then you bring it into the house. If you bring something into the house we mentioned last week through the window, I think it's a Gemara in Gittin and Mishnah other places, you're not chayiv and truma. That people would try to make it this trick. It's kind of like lahavdil what's it called, the tax shelter. So a truma shelter would be bringing the stuff into your house through a window instead of through the doorway. So, and then in general, but if you're allowed to eat a temporary snack, meaning not a regular meal from food before it's processed, even without taking truma maaser. So let's say Eli had hit when he was his second year in yeshiva. For some reason, they took him to a cherry farm in Israel, and they said you're allowed to eat some. They didn't recommend eating too much because they said it has a laxative effect. Was the term that they used, but they're able to eat it even without taking truma off for maaser because they're literally taking it off the trees and they're just having a snack. So you're allowed to eat from a snack, not so much, and not in a formal setting like sitting at a table before trumas maaser taking off. So hichna shibolim lasos mehem isa. So if you brought these, it was unprocessed grain into your house to make a dough from them. You're allowed to eat a snack from them. Upater, and you're exempt from taking off truma and maaser. Lamol b'mlilos, but if you brought it to rub them to get the kernels out of there, it's machlokas tanaim. Rabbi Mechayiv, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Huda Poter. Rabbi Yossi says you're chayiv to take off truma because you don't need anything else. They're ready to do what you're going to do with it. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Huda Poter. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Huda says you are exempt from taking off the truma. So we'll just read the next couple lines, even though it's not relevant to what we're doing today, but it was last week. So the question was, is there ever a case where, according to Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, you wouldn't have to, you would have to, there would be a time where you wouldn't have to separate a truma until Yantif. So the Gemara, what we finished off last week, was saying Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, Nami Mishkachasa, we could find a case according to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, that you should be able to separate Truma and Yantif because Truma is the time where it became Chayiv. It wasn't, you were not obligated to separate the Truma before Yantif. And what's the case? You brought these stalks into your house with the intention you were gonna process it into wheat, into flour, and make dough out of it. And then on Yantif, you change your mind and you say, oh, I'm just going to rub the kernels out of there and eat the kernels. So it ends up that when you brought them into the house, it was the final step of processing already. Because, I mean, just the rubbing it is not considered a step of processing. So now on Yantif, with your decision, it means it's chayiv and truma right away. The tavla biyome, it became tevel, it became something that needed truma to be separated from it on that day of Yantif. So then the Gemara said, "Elamai truma rov truma." So we're not saying that there's no case, according to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, where you could separate truma on Yantif, whether you would be a situation where the first opportunity to separate a truma on Yantif would take place. Ela rov trumos. The majority of cases are that you never have to separate truma before you never. There's always an opportunity to. It's not always. In the vast majority of cases, there's an opportunity to separate truma before yanta. There's a very minority of cases, like this case, where there is no opportunity to separate truma before yantif. But that answers what the Gemara was talking about last week. But now we're going to analyze this machlokus between Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi. Amar Abaye machlokus b'shibolim. Abaye says the machlokas between Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Huda, and Rabbi meaning Rabbi Huda Anasi is when they're stalks or when they're what does he call it? Ears of grain. Aval but if we're talking about legumes like beans or things like that, divrei hakol isur yasa tavla. Everyone agrees that tying them up is what makes them tevel. So I assume the word here isur yasa is like the word isruchag, and in halal isruchag bavosim. So we're tied. So a prisoner is called an asir sometimes because he's tied up. So when you make a bundle, you tie it up. So legumes, even Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says when you tie it up, even though you didn't do anything to the beans, you just pick them and you tie them up. That's considered that their processing is final, and I guess you wouldn't. You you have to take teruma and maaser off of them right away. You wouldn't even be able to eat a snack of them. Now, just FYI though, beans are definitely only trumas are definitely only derabana. It doesn't grow on a tree, and even things that grow on trees, there's a machlokas rishonim, several way machlokas rishonim what needs to be taken truma maaser off. These beans would only be derabana. But on that derabana level, it's tevel right away. Lema masayele. Let's say that there's a certain Mishnah that proves Abaye's point. Misha chavile tilsam shel tavel. If you had tilsam, so fenugreek is some type of. Let me check something up here. I just thought of something. Um, so this Rabbi Schwartz, Zichrono Livracha, held that fenugreek is not kitnius, but some say from our Gemara here that they don't quote who it is. They say a contemporary posek. They say prominent posek. Tilson says min kitniasu. So kitnias means it's a class of legumes. But the CRC in this article here by Rabbi Cohn at the CRC says that someone said it says the word kitnias, so it's including kitnias for Pesach, which is not a very strong rye at all. But some say that it's kitnias, but Rabbi Schwartz held that it's not kitnias. And they put it in maple syrup flavors.
Yeah. Are they supposed to separate room?
On a Drabana level. If it's kitnius, yeah, you could separate on Pesach, but we're not, Ashkenazim won't eat it on Pesach if it's kitnius. So it doesn't matter. If you're Sephardic,
No. Yeah, about Sephardic.
if you're Sephardic and it became chayav and truma during Pesach, you would have to separate truma from it. But the Gemara says here and that fenugreek, it has these, I guess, the meaty part from within the cover, whatever. I mean, think of a pea pod. So you separate the pod, and inside there are little peas or beans, whatever. You get a I don't know what the word is, but there's a long thing, and you open it up, and there's several roundish or elliptical egg-shaped things inside. So if this fenugreek, I guess even though the you open it up and those pods inside are the main thing, and they would grind that up and use it as a spice, but the taste of that surrounding thing also has the same flavor or aroma, whatever. So they would use that as a spice also, even though that wasn't the primary thing. So Misha Yilochavile Tilsum Shel Tevel. So if you had bundles of fenugreek that was Tevel, the Truma and Maaser wasn't taken off, Hareza Kosesh, you can grind it up. Now I thought kosesh means grinding. Article translates as you could smash them, you could pound them. Machashiv kamazer yesh behem. And you would estimate how much of the whole fenugreek was the pods that were inside. Zera literally means seeds, but I guess it means the like the pea pod, the pod that was inside. Umafrishela zera veno mafrishela eitz. You have to separate truma based on how much the pods inside the I don't know, call them stalks. I don't know what else to call them. Brian would probably know these things, right? He grows them.
I think it's
Yeah.
a word for
But I'm just saying, but if you would grow any type of bean or even a string bean, what do we call the outer part? And when you open up, we call the inside pods or peas, right? What's the outer thing called?
The outside.
That's it, yeah.
Oh, that's the pod.
Outside.
Oh, okay, so that's about. So so the pod you would crush also, but you don't have to take truma and maaser off of the pod.
Because that's like for a nut. So
Correct. So for nuts, it's inedible.
what's inside for?
What?
What's
Truma is the amount that goes to a Kohen, and Maaser is the amount that goes to a Levi. So the amount that goes to a Kohen, Midiraisa, could be even one little thing for a whole giant thing, but Midrabanan, it's either a 40th, a 50th, or a 60th.
He's taking. Can't you just put them all in a pile and take some of them as a whole and give it to him?
So Rashi says that what we would call piling up or the end of processing, which depends on different things. Fenugreek, it's not processed until you smash it up.
You can't give it.
So you can't give it before that time because it's not.
Okay.
So you smash it with intact with the pods, but the pod part itself you don't have to take truma from. It's only from the seeds or the pea type things that are inside is what you have to take truma. But you smash it all together. So because you didn't separate it, you don't exactly know how much uh we'll call it the Gemara calls it seeds there were, but so you estimate how much was seeds, and then you take 1/40th, 1/50th, or 1/60th. So 2%, give or take a little bit, as truma, estimated on how much was the seed inside.
About,
About for
fenugreek in
kidneys
particular, because.
for Pesach?
No,
No,
about having it subject to truma and all, because I thought we're not supposed to estimate things.
so that's what the Gemara is going to ask about. Well, you might be thinking specifically about the Mishnah Pirkei Avos that you shouldn't be in the habit of taking maaser off as an estimation. So that's not a halachic problem. Here we're talking about a possible halachic problem. But yeah, you're correct in thinking about that Mishnah Pirkei Avos. So my love, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda. So let's say that this Mishnah is, even though it doesn't say who the Tana is, let's say that the Tana is Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, the Amar Hasam Lo Tavla, who holds that in regard to these grains that you had brought in, it depended. So the grains weren't really processed yet, and depended were you going to then separate the grains to take the kernels out and grind it into flour to make bread or not. So in that case, well, the other question is Lamolim Bamlios. You're gonna rub them to get the kernels out. So Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Huda says that is not that's not chayv and truma. So why don't we say that the difference is that hasam lo tavla, that but hacha tavla. But in regard to wheat, where uh where the kernels they're inside, but so there is a similarity between, let's say, the wheat and the barley and legumes, that you have to do some type of separation to get what's inside. And on Shabbos, we call it dash, threshing. You have threshed the wheat to get inside, and you have to somehow open up the pods to get the beans or the kidneys from inside. Okay? But so there is a similarity, but halachically they're very different based on the processing for the needs of people. And right now we're not talking about regular beans. Like if you want kidney beans or we're not talking about separating those pods to get the kidney beans out, which I've never seen it done, but I guess that's how they have to get them out, right? If they're kidneys, they're legumes, they grow that way. But in regard to the grain that you're going to rub to get the kernels out, that's not tava, but hacha tavla. But we needed that mishnah to show that in the case of kidneys, like the fenugreek, that is tava. Because according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, there's no difference. That's an unprocessed stock. This is unprocessed stock. So according to Rabbi wouldn't need to tell us that mishnah because we already know it from this other halacha of malilos to rub the kernels of grain rub the ears of grain to get the kernels of the wheat out. But this would have to be Rabbi Yosef Yehuda because there's a big difference between in din that this is considered that the grain for the wheat, that's you bring it into the house like that to rub, that's not considered final processing. But legumes or fenugreek specifically, that is that. So okay, we infer that the author is Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Huda. So the Gemara says, "Lo, Rabbi he could still follow truma." So the Gemara says, "He Rabbi he my area until safilu shabalanami." Why did it make it sound like it's only the case of fenugreek? It's not limited to things that are just like fenugreek. Even wheat would be chayiv and truma when it reached this level, when you bring it into the house, because that's what we know from this other halacha of Rabbi. Afilu shbalim nami. Even stalks of grain like this, wouldn't be, and the way the reason for when you bring a very specific case like fenugreek, you think it's something special about fenugreek. But if it's Rebbe, it's not so special. If it's fenugreek might be it's a specialty item. Most people don't use it, but wheat everyone uses. So why limit it to the Mishnah to talk about fenugreek if it's something that's related to even much more popularly used crops? Elamai, Rabbi Yehuda. So if you want to tell us that this Mishnah is, so we're answering a question with the question. If it is Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Lashmina, Sharmina, Kitnias, the Choshekin Tilson. Again, why use such a unique, unusual crop of fenugreek? Just tell us in general, Kitnias. And that would be a better way of telling us halacha. This applies to all Kitnias, not just fenugreek. Fenugreek is unique in that the pods are also used because it has the same taste and flavor as what's inside. So, whereas let's say kidney beans don't have the pods that the kidney beans are in don't not that the kidney beans are spices, but it's not as give a bigger class of examples rather than a very specific class. Lahavdil, Kahneman and Tversky had a case. They gave case studies. This woman does this, and she's involved in this organization. What and this stuff. What do you think if I gave you 5 or 6 things of her profession? What do you think she is? And one of them was a librarian, and one of them was a feminist librarian. And because I think one of the organizations was, I don't know, related to abortion rights or something, at that time it was a cutting edge feminist cause. So most people answered a feminist librarian. And Kahneman and Tversky gave this example to show the fallacy in that, because if you would take a Venn diagram, librarians is a bigger class. Feminist librarians is a subclass within that whole circle of the Venn diagram. So don't limit yourself. There's a more likelihood that it's of the bigger class than the smaller class. So lahavdil, the Gemara is saying here that why limit yourself just to fenugreek? If it's Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, he should say all. Yeah. Okay, what did we say about this? Oh, you're in the wrong app right now. Do you want a drink? I know, but I told you we don't. That you have one snack. Do you want to take a lollipop?
That's strong food.
If you could have a lollipop.
Okay.
So we know that for grain, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda doesn't consider this processed enough. But this Mishnah spoke about fenugreek. Why not say all legumes? That would be a much more inclusive list than fenugreek, but l'chora it should be the same halacha. So if it's Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, why limit it to fenugreek? The Cholchikein Tilson and fenugreek would also Tilson would be included in that because that's a subset of it. Tilson Itzrchele, but so it must be that there's something special about fenugreek. We needed to specifically talk about fenugreek because silka daitachamina habatam etzo period shava. I need you to get off the chair. So it's not working. Okay, now go back on it. Is that good? Since the pods and the seeds inside have the same taste, I might think you should separate teruma and maaser also from the pod. Amash malan. So the Mishnah has to tell us just about fenugreek and not about all legumes. So it seems that we are saying that this Beitza does follow Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, but not for the reason of Abaye. Igda Amri, some said that Amar Abaye machlokus b'shbulim, that Abaye said that machlokus in the Mishnah between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda Anasi was only about stalks of grain of albakitnius, but if it's legumes, divrei hakol yisur lo tavla. If it was legumes, even everyone agrees, even Rabbi agrees that it's not tevel when it's legumes. Now, the Tosos mentions that the Sarmikutsi, Reb Shimon Mikutsi, this feels that there's something strange about this because the Ikeda Amri are usually similar, and this Ikeda Amri is kind of like exactly opposite. So he has a different shot, but I don't know. It's interesting to see they may have such a question. So Mesave, so instead of trying to prove by from a Mishnah, yeah. If you had bundled fenugreek stalks or pods, you smash them and then you calculate how much of the was seeds because you have the pod and the seeds together. You have to separate truma maaser on the from the volume of the seeds. You don't have to do it from literally the wood, but the pod. So my lab tevel shel truma. When it says tevel, don't we mean that it's tevel untithed that truma hasn't been taken off yet? So if it's tevel, that means it needs truma. But Abaye said that if kitnius, even Rebbe agrees that you don't need to take off truma. So this would be a question against Abaye. So now it's 13a3 for those in the art scroll. Low. No, that's not the way we should interpret the Mishnah. Tevel shel trumas maaser. The stalks of fenugreek are tevel that the trumas maaser hasn't been taken off. So when you separate the 2%, give or take, for a Kohen, then you have to take 10% of the remaining, give it to the Levi. Then the Levi has to separate trumas maaser from his portion. So we're saying, no, it's only tevel for trumas maaser. So we end up, it's talking about a very special, so really it hasn't been processed yet, but it's a case where the Levi took it too early before he should have taken it. Because that's Craig asked a few minutes ago about it has to reach a certain level of processing before it's chayv and truma. So here it and maaser. So here it didn't reach that level yet. A Levi got maaser from it, and I mean the Levi can't just take it and becomes Levi. The owner has to give it, but the owner gave him maaser before the truma had been taken out. So we're saying that these stocks that the Levi has, he's not allowed to eat them yet because he needs to take off the truma's maaser and give that to a coin before he could eat it. And according to Rabbi, who said the name of Reish Lakish, so Reish Lakish, we usually call him Reish Lakish, but his name was Shimon. And the Gemara sometimes calls him Reb Shimon ben Lakish. We use Reish Lakish, Reb Shimon Lakish interchangeably. I probably say Reish Lakish more often because it's a little quicker, less syllables, right? But I don't want you to be confused that Reish Lakish and Reb Shimon ben Lakish are the same person. And he always a student and a sister-in-law of Rabbi Yochanan and Chavrusas, and then he died because Rabbi Yochanan was mad at him and gave him a real look, and he got sick and died. But that's the Gemara Bava Metzia. Maaser Rishon Shekdimu b'Shibolim. Rabbi Abba said in the name of Reish Lakish that if Maaser was given to a Levi in a state of the things were still stocks before Truma was taken up, before it was even Chayv in Truma, Shmo Tovelu Trumas Maaser. The fact that you took Maaser off, it does have a status of Maaser in regard to the fact that now you have to give the portion to the Kohen. So it is Trumas Maaser already. I mean, it is the Maaser takes effect to the extent that that the Levi does have to separate Trumas Maaser. Because you could say if it doesn't work at all, this isn't even Maaser, and he could eat it a snack. But we're saying no, even though it shouldn't have been done, but if it did happen, it is Maaser to the degree or to the definition that he needs to separate portion to the Truma to the Kohen first, and he's not allowed to eat it at all before that. We're going to talk about this more when we get to Amud Beis. I have a special an article from Ramosha's brother of Yosef from years ago about this topic. Mentioned a couple points of that the whole thing is beyond the scope of it's more about Truma, but there's some parts from here that will be exciting to talk about. So the whole the chiddush of the Mishnah about the fenugreek is that it's that even though you don't have to take off Truma or Maaser, if you did separate the Maaser, it does take effect that to the degree that the Levi has to now give up its portion to the Kohen and he can't eat without that. Okay, so the Gemara asks, Kosei Shlamali. So why do we have to talk about crushing these fenugreek pods and separating Truma? Why don't we say the Levi said just like they were separate, even though this isn't the normal way of processing it, but since I got Maaser from stalks, I'm going to give you your Trumas Maaser as stalks or as pods. If it's good enough for me, it's good enough for you. But from the Mishnah, we're learning that the Levi has to, according to this understanding, the Levi has to crush them and give the Trumas Maaser from it. He's not allowed to give them as the pods to the Kohen. So why not? So Rava says, Knas, it's a punishment. A Knas literally means a fine, but we're punishing the Levi for having taken it first, where before it should have been done. He has to do that extra step himself before he's able to give it to the Kohen and then be allowed to eat it himself. Taninami Hachi, we have a brisa like this, similar to this. Ben Levi Shenasano Lo Shibolim b'Maisrosav, a Levi who received, it was given to him stalks or ears of grain as Meiser. Oso Sogoren, he has to make it into a pile, or meaning finishing processing it, in order before he can give Trumas Meiser. Anavim, if they gave Levi grapes. Now nowadays, grapes is a big. Morty, do you eat lots of grapes? Morty, do you eat grapes? Do you eat a lot of grapes? Are they yummy? So grapes are a big thing. But in those days, they didn't really eat fresh grapes. They would make wine from it. So nowadays, I guess it would depend if you're growing grapes for eating versus like lahavdil. It's not a perfect analogy, but Ramosha points out that Europeans, like his father, they never ate raw carrots. They only ate cooked carrots. Whereas Americans, we more often eat raw carrots than cooked carrots. We have tzimis because it's a tradition, but for us, the raw carrots are fine to eat. So it was a cult. It's some cultural difference. So there's just been a big difference in the way that we use some foods. We eat a lot of people eat grapes nowadays. In those days, in time of the Mishnah, the Gemara, they never ate grapes. They only made it into wine. So if you gave, so nowadays that we have probably crops of grapes and crops of wine, I would assume, or grapes that are made for wine or for juice, I guess you'd have to give off truma a different way for each of them, and you probably couldn't give off truma for the wine grapes by just giving raw grapes to a Kohen. You actually have to process it into wine first, and then give truma straight from wine. And it's a term in Chazal. Truma's go no, it's in a pasuk. Truma's goren uchutvas Yaakov. So, well, truma's goren is truma from the storage house of grain, and uchutvas Yaakov. Yaakov is the wine press. So they'd have to give the truma from the wine, not from the grapes. So you don't want this, or you do want it? Oh, here. Is that good? Next time, please tell me what you want. So if they gave Levi grapes, now grapes wasn't processed yet. It's not processed till it's made into oil. Excuse me, into wine. Zaysim osim shemen, or olives. You gave him olives as maaser before you press them into olive oil. In those days, they didn't use olives plain. They always made it into olive oil. So the Levi has to make the grapes into wine and the olives into oil. Umafresh shalem trumas maaser, and then he has to separate truma maaser from the oil from the wine, or from if he was given wheat kernels or ears of grain, he has to process it to the degree that it would normally be processed, and then give truma maaser. Then he gives it to the Kohen. Just like regular truma can't be taken from these products raw, the grapes or the olives or the whole ears of grain, as we turn to Yud Gimel Amid Beis, Elamin Hagarn Min Yaakov, just from the silo and from the wine press, which is the pasuk I just mentioned to you. It's in Parshas Korach, I think. Kach truma maaser ain't any tells elamin agor min Yaakov. So too trumas maaser can only be taken from when the processing is done, from the silo or from the wine press. Okay, so now this is what Marty was similar to what Marty was asking. So we said that when the Levi pounds the fenugreek, he estimates how much was pad. Well, it doesn't really matter how much was pad, how much was the seed, and he only has to take truma based on that amount. B'chashev, to estimate hamid medida bai, but in regard to trumas maaser, you actually have to give an accurate measurement, not estimating. So the Gemara says, Hamani Abba Lazar ben Gimel. This is the opinion of Abba Lazar ben Gimel. The Tana is learned in a brisa. Now I never heard of this Tana before, but that's why we learn and we get to learn more Tanaim and Amoraim. The Rambam might, but the Meiri also does. The Meiri does in his Akdama to Pirkei Avos. He mentions, I think, Tanaim and Amoraim, like the first when we're rarely quoted Tanaim and Amoraim he mentions which Masechta they're mentioned in. So v'nachshav lechem trumaschem. There's a pasuk in, I think, Re'eh. Is it Re'eh? No, it's also in Korach. V'nachshav lechem trumaschem. You will calculate or your truma. So v'nachshav, I mean, a machshev in modern Hebrew is a calculator, but chashivos means important, but a machshava is a thought. So those three ideas are going to be important for what we're about to say. V'nachshav lachem truma eschem, you can calculate your truma. B'shtei truma sakos medaber. So truma eschem kind of is plural. There's two types of truma. Achas truma gedola, v'achas trumas maaser. One is the big truma. That's what we take directly from our crop and give it straight to the Kohen. And the second one is the trumas maaser, the truma that the Levi has to take out of his tenth. Kishem truma gedola nitelas ba'omed. Just like the main truma, the big truma that you give straight to the Kohen has to be, it can be estimated uv'machshava, and you don't have to verbalize this is truma. You can take a thing and in your mind, this is truma, that's enough. And the Gemara in Kedushin, in the second parak, and maybe other places, learned it from the word v'nachshav. Since nachshav is related to the word machshava, you could separate truma without a verbal declaration, this is truma. Your mental decision that this is truma is enough to make it truma. Kach truma ma'aser tells omed. Similarly, the truma that the Levi has to take off of his tenth, it can be taken with an estimation, uv'machshava, and also without a verbal declaration. So we see that. So it seems a different way to respond to Marty's question from a few minutes ago is that Mishnah in Pirkei Avos may not follow Abba Lazar ben Gimel, which we know who the Tano said that is, but it doesn't even have to conflict because Abba Gimel says you can't. The Pirkei Avos is giving us advice saying it's not a good idea. Even if it's mutter, it's not a good idea to estimate. And some of the Rishonim on that Mishnah say because you're gonna give too much. It might be bad for you to estimate because you might be estimating maybe giving 3% all the time instead of 2.25, whatever the 1/40th would get 2.5, whatever it would. So you're making it bad for yourself. You're giving away more than you need to. Gufa. So now we mentioned this Mishnah. This statement of an Amora. Amar Rabbi Bo, Amar Rabbi Shimon Lakish. Ma'aserishon shekdimu b'shibulim. Rabbi Bo said in the name of Reish Lakish that if maaser rishon was given to the Levi in a state of when it was in stalks, not fully processed yet, shmo tovel trumas maaser. The shmo giving it the name of maaser makes it tevel, makes it not allowed to be eaten until the Levi separates truma from it, the trumas maaser from it. My taima, what's the reason? Amarava hoel v'yatzalav shei maaser. Now that it's called maaser, truma has to be taken off. So the Rashba asks, well, what's Rava saying that Abaye, that Reish Lakish didn't say? So Rav Yosef, for Moshe's brother, he should live and be well, he says he has for different reasons he has a principle, but he applies it explicitly to our Gemara that normally when the grain reaches a certain level of processing, you have to separate the trumas and maasros. However, he says that trumas maaser is different. Trumas maaser is not based on the fact that it reached a certain level of processing. He says once something's called maaser, there's a new obligation of trumas maaser. So it's completely different obligation than everything else. So all the other separations that have to be taken off are based on the level of processing. And trumas maaser is independent of processing. And so he explains, but this principle that I'm mentioning, he developed that from something else, but he applies it to that based from Rabbi Bo, Amar Rabbi Shimon Lakish, we would think it's the same thing. But what's the reason? So Rava teaches us, Rava teaches us no, taking off trumas maaser has nothing to do with the fact that it's not processed. It has to do when once something becomes maaser, now you have to separate trumas maaser, okay. Amar Rabbi Shimon Lakish, Reish Lakish said, and then he mentions also that there's a machlokas Rashi and the Rambam. So that on Amar Aleph on the previous Amud that once, so we mentioned that once you give it to the Levi and we say that the giving it as maaser takes effect to the degree that he's not allowed to eat it until the Kohen gets his portion. So it's clear from Rashi and Amud Aleph that he's not allowed to even eat it even as a snack, and if he would get a death penalty like regular tevel. So according to Rashi, this has status midiraisa. It's tevel midiraisa, and the truma must be taken out on a Torah level, and if not, it has all the same Torah prohibitions against eating for a non-Kohen eating truma. But he says the Rambam says, and this Rambam is in Pir Gimel of Hilchos Maaser Halacha Yud Ches, the Rambam holds that it's only tevel midrabanan. It's only that so if he would eat it, he would get lashes, rabbinic lashes, and he wouldn't get a heavenly death penalty for eating truma. So even though the Rashi and the Rambam they all agree with this halacha that it is tevel, there's a big difference that Rashi holds it's diraisa. It's still the obligation to take off the trumas maaser is from a Torah level. Well, if it's pods, let's say if it was the grains of wheat, that the chiyuv truma is midiraisa to begin with. But that's a different question. If you ate tevel on something that was only chayiv and truma midirabanan, would there be a death penalty if that's a pretty fundamental question. I should know. I should find out the answer to that. So meaning if you had wheat or you had wine, you definitely have to take off truma on a Torah level. Kitnias, though, the beans, you don't have to take off truma from a Torah level. What if someone ate, it's only a rabbinic level. What happens if someone who's not a Kohen ate those before truma was taken off? What punishment does he get? That's the question that I am wondering, and I need to find out. Okay. Actually, maybe can you ask your chavrusa tomorrow morning? I'll text you the question.
Yeah.
Okay. Both if he's next time you see him.
Send it to me so I don't forget. So
Yeah.
I'll word it right.
Yeah. So we mentioned okay. Okay, we're on the last paragraph now on 13b1. Rabbi Shimon Lakish, Maaser Rishon Shekdim B'Shibulim Pater Mitruma Gedola. Rish Lakish says that if Maaser Rishon was given to a Levi before it was finished processing, it was still stalks or ears, Pater Mitruma Gedola. It's exempt for you don't have to take off the big truma to the Kohen. Shenemar v'Erimosa Mimenu Trumas Hashem Maaser Min Maaser. Because the pasuk says you have to separate from that maaser, a truma of Hashem, a maaser from the maaser. So maaser min maaser martilach, you have to separate a separation from this maaser. V'lo truma gedola utrumas maaser min maaser, and you don't have to separate truma and trumas maaser. Basically, what he's saying is that even though truma hadn't been taken off of any of this grain, when if the Levi got it in a way that he shouldn't have, but it does take effect, he doesn't have to separate two trumas. You might think he has to separate the regular truma, which was never separated, plus the truma from his maaser. So Reish Lakish is saying no. He only has to separate the trumas maaser. He doesn't have to separate the initial truma on his part either, but also. Amarle Rapapa Abaye. Rapapa asked Abaye about this. Ihachi, if that's true, afilu hikdimu bekri nami. Even if it reached the level of processing, for example, it was piled up, and the Levi got his maaser before truma was taken off, then in that case you should say that the pasuk is saying a Levi only has to give trumas maaser. He never has to give regular truma and trumas maaser. But if his maaser was from a pile that truma should have been given out, because it reached the level of production of gemar malacha that truma should have been taken out. Why doesn't he have to give both? In that case, he should give both. But according to what you're saying he shouldn't have to. There should be an exemption from this drasha that you just learned from the pasuk. So Amarle, Alacha Amar Kra, about your case, the pasuk says, Mikol mas matnosechem tarimo eis kol trumas Hashem. From all your gifts, you have to separate trumas Hashem. So there's another pasuk that would include other cases, such as in this case, where truma should have been separated first but wasn't. In that case, the Levi would have to give both. The special exemption that he mentioned first was only from the case where the whole produce wasn't chayiv in truma yet, but the Levi got it anyway. But we said it's enough of a level of truma, enough of a level that if you separated trumas maaser, you separated maaser to a Levi, the maaser does take effect. So then the Gemara asks, Umara Isa, why does Reish Lakish darshan the pasuk in this way that if the Levi got the unprocessed thing, he only has to separate trumas maaser, but if he got something that truma should have been separated from, it wasn't, he does have to give both. Why does he learn both of these ways and not switch and learn it for the opposite cases? That if truma should have been given out, it's not the Levi's fault. The Levi should only have to give off his portion. Whereas if he got it as a stock or as an heir, let him have to give both. So hi Idgan, because this case, it's already reached its state of being processed enough. So v'hai lo Idgan. And the other case where he got it as stocks, it hasn't been processed enough. So there's no reason to make him give truma for something that hasn't reached a little a minimum level of being processed. Okay, so let's go a few more minutes. Tanan Hasam, we learned in the Mishnah, Makalif Sa'orim, so we saw this, I think on Yud Beis Amud Beis. No, we didn't see this. It's said we're going to ask from it, but no, this is a new Mishnah from my source that we haven't seen. Hamakalif Sa'orim, if you are peeling barley kernels, so it's actually Machlokas Rashi and Tosos what this case is. Makalif so let's just say you're peeling the barley kernel. So meaning you have a full barley kernel and there's some bran or whatever on the outside. And I guess, well, are you peeling off the bran or you're peeling off the stuff outside the bran even. Yeah, so you don't even have, you have to get off the outer layer in order to get to the barley kernel. Makalif achas va'ochel. You could peel one off at a time and eat it, and that's a temporary eating. You don't have to take off truma maaser. But if you peeled it and then put it in your hand, I guess, meaning you peel it and you put it right in your mouth. That you don't have to take a maaser. If you peel it, then put it in your other hand, that's a level of that you reach this final level of processing, and truma and maaser would have to be separated before you eat them. So that's a certain level of minimum processing. Rabbi Lazar v'chein l'Shabbos. Rabbi Lazar says this is also in regard to Shabbos, that on Shabbos you're not allowed to dash, you're not allowed to thresh, and that's getting the edible stuff from inside the outer wrapping. It's the same halacha in regard to Shabbos. That you do one, it's not threshing or a told of threshing, but if you would put it in your hand, then it would be threshing. Ini is that so? V'harav mekafale dvisu kase kase. But Rav's wife used to peel cups and cups of barley for him. I don't know if it literally means cups, but it means a whole bunch, not just Reb Chia mekafale dvisu kase kase. And also Reb Chia, his wife, used to also peel cups of barley for him on Shabbos. So if Rabbi Lazar said what Rabbi Lazar said is true, it doesn't fit in with what Rav's and Reb Chia's wife did. because they did a lot on Shabbos. So that should have been a level of processing that should have qualified it as dash, as threshing. So Itmar, so if you want to say that the Shabbos, it's the same thing. The Shabbos Aseifa Itmar. It wasn't on that part of the Mishnah, but there's another part of the Mishnah, the second part, and he was talking about that. Hamola Malil, and this is what we saw in Yud Beis Amud Beis. Hamola Malil Shel Chitin. If you rub the the ears of wheat to get the kernels out of it, menapech. So menapech yad al yad va'ochel. So he said, in order to get the chaff off, you could kind of go from hand to hand, and then you're able to eat it. But if you kind of blew on it or whatever, and then it went into your lap, chayev, you have to separate truma, because that's when it went into your lap, that's like it was piled. Rabbi Lazovsky says that is like Shabbos. The same halacha for that is on Shabbos. So Tosfos, there's Tosfos here. Tosfos asks, what's the difference between peeling these barley kernels and this rubbing the ears, this malilos, to get the so we saw in Yud Beis Amud Beis that the rubbing, there's a limit to what you could do. You could only rub. The question was if you did it before Shabbos, you can how can you separate the chaff of it on Shabbos? But it sounded like rubbing it to get the kernels out is not mutter on Shabbos at all. So how come if the pshat is like Rashi, they're analogous cases? How come you're allowed to peel the barley on Shabbos, but you're not allowed to rub the ears of wheat on Shabbos? So therefore, Tosfos says that the cases are different. I don't know what the pshat is for Rashi, but Tosfos says that the case of this is you're separating the kernels from the stalks. So that's the malacha of mafarek. And that's dash, that's a form of threshing, which is not malacha. But here, the kernels were already separated from the barley stalks, but they're still in some type of outer shell. And that's why you're able to do that on Shabbos. It's not nearly the degree of the definition of threshing as the rubbing the malilo case. Okay, we'll leave it here. We're at 2 dots, I think. No, we're not at 2 dots, but we're at a good place to stop. Okay.